So this is the Price is Wrong, an analysis of security complexity. I noticed the line to my friends over there. We're talking about hacktivism. Maybe I should add that into the title. They had a very long line. Because we will be talking about different types of attacks, not just an analysis of complexity of security, but we'll also be looking at several attacks and how they happened, the complexity that they introduced to the victims who are trying to analyze them. And I'm actually excited to show you this today because these are some of these attacks, two of them specifically, have never been exposed before. So I want to show you some of the tactics and techniques that attackers are using. The section today, an analysis of security complexity, is actually going to be looking at security and security incidents from multiple angles. So we'll be looking at the security side, so how defenders are having to fight the complexity that is brought on by point solutions. We'll be looking at how this came about, why this started, and why we reached this point today. And we'll be looking, as I mentioned, at the attackers, both from how they launch their attacks, as well as at some of the offerings from the criminal underground and what they're providing in terms of services and tools to battle the security tools that we are putting out there. We might skip some slides towards the end because I have way too many slides for just 15 minutes, but we'll also talk about the criminal's perspective as to why this is happening. So we'll try to get to the core of both the defenders and the attackers' complexity. The mandatory disclaimer slide, you've probably seen this in all the other presentations. A couple words about myself. My name is Itai Maor. I'm the Chief Security Strategist for Cato Networks and the founding member of Cato Control. For those who don't know, Cato Networks is a provider of SASE, Secure Access Service Edge, actually the first and only single vendor SASE solution out there. And Cato Control stands for Cyber Threats Research Lab, is the group that I founded, which is the threat intelligence group within Cato. And you'll see today actually parts of a report that we're going to be releasing tomorrow, I believe. It hasn't been released yet, so you guys will be the first viewers of some of the statistics and data from that report. Prior to joining Cato, I was a Chief Security Officer at Insights, which got acquired by Rapid7. Before that, I was Executive Security Advisor at Trusteer that got acquired by IBM. And before that, I was head of the Cyber Threats Research Lab for RSA Security. Got acquired by EMC, Dell, and I'm not even sure who owns it right now. I'm from Boston. I'm an adjunct professor for cybersecurity. I teach a course called Designing Offensive and Defensive Capabilities, teaching students how to defend, but mostly how to attack the infrastructure that they are trying to defend, actually finishing this semester. And as I sometimes tell, I started my career back in high school, not in a very good way. I wasn't a very good student, so I hacked into my school's database and changed my grades. My father, who was Department of Defense, loved it. My mother, who was a teacher in that school, didn't love it, so I got punished. Actually, my parents, I was a really bad student. My father didn't even believe that I'll finish high school. So now every time I get an email at Boston College that starts with "Dear Professor Maor," I have an auto-forward rule to my dad's email account. Like, Professor. But enough about my family, although I will mention one more thing about my family a little bit later. Let's get into it. So the realization and actually the cause for security complexity today. There's a quote that I really like from the movie Pirates of the Caribbean. The problem is not the problem is your attitude about the problem, which I think really summarizes what we're seeing today. I said I'm going to mention my family one more time. I used that sentence in an argument with my wife a couple of months ago. Don't. The price is wrong for that one for sure. I think I was right. The couch was comfortable. But it's the attitude towards the problem, because I've been doing cybersecurity for roughly 25 years now. And to be honest, the attacks themselves haven't changed all that much, right? We're still talking about phishing. We're talking about malware. We're talking about social engineering. Even ransomware is something that started in the late 90s. So the attacks themselves haven't changed all that much. And don't believe me when I say it. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll show you that the criminals are saying the same thing. But our attitude to it is actually the problem. And where does it start? I stole this slide from Michael Fisher, that summarizes, well, doesn't even summarize, it actually shows you the different layers of security and the different tools for each and every layer. And to be honest, this is a little pressing to look at because while I do firmly believe in multiple layers of security, having so many point solutions for each layer for defense in depth is unmanageable. Statistics that we read about today talk about roughly 20 to 25 security products for small and medium businesses, over 60 security products for larger organizations. That is extremely hard to manage. Not only to manage, but actually it's been put to the test constantly by threat actors, and the results aren't that great. So how did we reach this situation? I want to talk about the single point of failure fallacy, because you might see these headlines when you read the news, and I'll show you some more updated ones, actually ones from last week that support this as well. Whenever a breach happens, you'll read something like this: hackers breach Lineage OS servers via unpatched vulnerabilities. And you read this and you think, oh, okay, so unpatched vulnerabilities, that's the problem, right? If they just patched their vulnerabilities, that would have never happened. And then you read something like, Colonial Pipeline was were breached due to compromised passwords. So if only Colonial were good with their passwords, none of that would have happened, right? Twitter was an insider hack. And here's an example of $55 million that were stolen due to phishing or bad coding like SQL injection. The problem that I have with each and every one of these headlines is they point to a single point of failure, which is completely wrong and a misunderstanding of what a breach really looks like. Let's go a second backwards. Do you think Colonial Pipeline only used passwords to protect their system? Of course not. They had a lot of different solutions: antiviruses, anti-malware, SIM, DLP, I'm assuming a lot of different tools inside their network. When a breach happens, it's a complete collapse of all the security processes and all the security tools that the organization or the enterprise had. Yet we keep pointing out these single point of failures as if they are the only problem and not everything that is included in the security stack of the organization that was breached. Why? And I hope our SA conference doesn't get mad at me. No, I'm from a vendor as well, right? It's because vendors will sell you a point solution for each one of these. Oh, you're worried about vulnerabilities? We have a solution for that. Oh, you're worried about malware? We have a solution for that. Oh, you're worried about intrusion detection? We have a solution for that. And what you end up with is the previous slide that I showed you of multiple layers of security, but so many different products in order to actually implement it. You might have heard this. This is a myth that I really have a hard time with. I'll tell you something that I didn't tell you when I introduced myself. I'm also part of the RSA conference committee. I actually help with hackers, and I used to help with hackers and threats. Now I'm in intelligence and analytics. So I get to see a lot of the presentations that you'll be seeing in this awesome conference today and the next couple of days. But sometimes I run into these myths, these sayings that are not only wrong, but actually sometimes really hurt the industry. This is one of them that I really like. I really hate. I'm gonna enjoy taking it apart. The defenders need to be right all the time. The attackers need to be right just once. Really? Let's take a look at what an attack really looks like. And to do that, I'm going to use the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with MITRE ATT&CK. If you're not, a very quick explanation of it. Does this have laser? Laser here? What you're looking at here is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. On the top, you can see the different tactics that attackers use from left to right during a breach. For each tactic, you have multiple techniques that they can use. And what I've done here is I highlighted the REvil ransomware gang and how their attack usually happens. And as you can see when I immediately showed it, usually when you read about it, you're there. But let's take a look. So usually they start with initial access using compromised credentials, then they do WMI, and then they do process injection. But look how many times the attackers have to be right to reach their end goal, and how many times the defenders need to be right just once in order to detect, mitigate, or prevent the attack. Of course, don't rely on a single solution to just detect one of these. You need to have a holistic solution to look at everything. But saying that the attackers need to be right just once is an oversimplification of what really happens. When I hear the attackers need to be right just once, I hear I have a product to sell you for that specific thing that you're looking at. So this is the reality of how attacks happen. And of course, this constantly changes and gets updated. I also thought it was important to mention that we are fighting an asymmetric fight, because the same groups that will target large organizations and enterprises will end up also targeting the smaller ones. And you don't get to have a level of Fortune 500 security in small and medium businesses. On the other hand, they have to face up against the same ones that the top 10 US banks and the top 10 commercial websites have to fight. It's an uneven fight. It makes it even more complex for the little guys, especially when you're talking about shortage in people to run these systems and an understanding in how to do so. Let's take a look at the infrastructure complexity, because this would have been a very different talk if I've done it, let's say about 10, 12 years ago, when the CISO would walk into his organization and everything was under their control. Everything was local, you'd have the perimeter, you set it up, you'd protect the perimeter, and everything inside was safe. It's very different today, right? Because you have your branches, you have your data center, you have global branches, you have people working from home, right? You have cloud applications that you don't even control that are part of your infrastructure, so anything that happens to them might also happen to you. We'll talk about that as well. You have third-party suppliers, and all of a sudden, the Chief Information Security Officer finds themselves not controlling everything, but being in charge still of the security of the organization. So they inherit the security of these other areas that they don't have any control over, which adds another layer of complexity. Let's talk about the security complexity. If you look at what are some of the analytics firms are saying, here's some of the trends for 2023. In the middle, you can see restructuring approaches. And the first one there is cybersecurity platform consolidation. I don't have the laser on this. Okay, whatever. Be kind of careful with the word consolidation. I'll talk about it a little bit later, because taking a bunch of point solutions and mushing them together doesn't really solve all the problems. It solves one of the problems that security complexity raises, but definitely not all of them. This is an article that I highly recommend reading. It was written actually by my CEO, Shlomo Kramer. Shlomo, for those who are not familiar, the founder of Check Point, the founder of Imperva, and now the founder of Cato Networks. And I like this article because there's a lot of self-reflection there. IT security is broken and it's my fault. And I wanted to highlight one specific sentence in this article that he wrote. The security industry was innately set up to build point solutions to stay ahead of attackers' latest methods. This point solution culture, which admittedly I helped create, has now become the IT security industry's biggest enemy. He's not talking about ransomware. He's not talking about any types of attacks or vulnerabilities. He's saying the actual solutions that we're using are the biggest enemy. Maybe the problem is not the problem. Maybe the problem is our attitude about the problem. I have a lot of memes in my slides, so you'll have to excuse my sense of humor. Because I was looking at network security and the different vulnerabilities. Now I will warn you, usually the guy in yellow that's giving a hand gives the guy, the network security, the white guy, a hug. My versions are a little bit more violent. Because this is the situation that we're facing right now. Okay, we have to ask ourselves, with these point solutions, are we adding solutions or are we adding problems? I'll discuss this a little bit more in depth in a couple of slides. So let's take a look at the consequences of what happens when you have point solutions. And the number one thing that I wanted to mention here, kind of that really hit me as soon as I joined Cato, was the loss of visibility means that there are security gaps. If you're not looking and seeing everything that is happening on your network, you're missing out. That's why it's still mind-boggling that you have the NOC and the SOC separately. We can't afford to have that situation anymore, because if you are not looking at each and every network flow and everything that's happening on your network, you are going to miss. You're going to have those gaps. Minimal contextualization, if at all. When you have multiple point solutions, they each look at the problem in their own silo, which means they rarely share information, and when they do, by the way, it's due to a lot of manual work done by security analysts. So we're missing a lot of contextualization with the attacks. Management overhead, you're ending up with, well, multiple point solutions, you're gonna have multiple policies. And by the way, when I say multiple point solutions, it's not just DLP and CASB and IDP and IPS and so on and so on. Even between firewalls, you'll go into organizations, you'll find multiple firewalls that have to be configured with multiple policies. Something there always fails. So you're ending up with multiple security policies. How are you going to apply that? False positives and missed attacks. Well, that's a result of everything we just said. Actually, if you take a look at this, I'm going to discuss a concept that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with towards the end. We're talking about the OODA loop here, right? The observe, orient, decide, and act. But I'll talk about that a little bit later. Two issues that are another result of the complexity with point solutions are updating and patching and misconfiguration. Now, if you ask my MDR team, and I'll be very conservative because the head of the MDR might be here. I didn't see him, and I know because I'm presenting with him tomorrow. They'll say that 85% of the attacks that we see today are a result of misconfiguration of security tools or unpatched security tools. I'll add on top of that another issue that is happening over and over and over again. It is the fact that the security tools that we use are the actual entry points for the attackers. So they actually attack the security tools, and that's their initial access to get in. I'll show you that when we go into the dark web and some of the solutions that the attackers are offering. But that always reminds me of the very sophisticated security gate, this one. So are we blocking the attackers, or are we giving them a letter in to our organization? That's a very bad design, but I love it. Let's move to the cost. And here I'm going to quote a report by the Ponemon Institute. IBM run a report with them every year. I remember when I was IBM, we used to look into that and contribute. So let's take a look at the IBM cost of a data breach report from 2023. And let's take a look at the hard costs, the actual numbers. This is one of the statistics that they advertised. I'm going to read it from here, just the headline. Increase in data breach cost for organizations that had high levels of security system complexity. They actually included multiple points about this and multiple numbers. This is the one that I found the most fascinating. It's a table that actually shows you which elements or what you do in the organization, whether it's processes or tools, how much the blue ones are with a minus. That's because they reduce the cost during a breach. And the ones on the at the bottom are a plus. That means they add to the cost of a breach. So if you take a look at the bottom portion, I'll zoom in for you who are there. The number one cause or the number one contributor for the cost of a data breach is security system complexity. But that's not all. You need to kind of have some more critical thinking and look behind the numbers here, because security skills shortage, non-compliance with regulations, and several others are actually inherited due to the complexity. We'll discuss this as well. But so I think the number, while it is the number one contributor, I think the actual number is much larger. I had to mention another thing here that has to do with complexity and has to do with a little bit of looking behind the numbers that we are shown. Regarding detection time, this is a point that really bothers me every time I read about detection time of attacks, because there's sort of a feeling like detection is getting better. It used to be, 18 months, and then it became a year, and then it became about 8 months or so, and it seems the number is going down, and I don't think that's actually true. And so I asked myself, where did detection time go? And I'm sorry for the dad joke, but it ran somewhere. Sorry, dry humor, I know, but that's, I try. What do I mean by it ran somewhere? Well, if you take a look at the numbers again this is from 22 and 23, They're saying in the IBM report, average cost difference between breaches that took more than 200 days to find and resolve and those that took less than 200 days, there's I think like a 25% difference. And if you look at the times, you'll see that the detection time seems to be going down. That is false. Ransomware is the number one contributing for that being false, because there are three ways in which a breach gets detected. Either ideally you don't get breached, but if you do, ideally you detect it, the organization detects it. If not, the detection may come from a third party, usually law enforcement or your clients that start seeing something happening, or law enforcement gives you a call, hey, we're seeing XYZ on the dark web on a ransomware leak site. The third and the worst one is when the criminals tell you that you've been breached. And that's exactly the case with ransomware. Because with ransomware, they could have been on the network a lot longer. But they're actually telling you that they're there by ransoming your files, and then you notice it. And so the breach time is going down, but that's because the attackers are notifying you. And if you've read about some of the latest attackers, I think it was Black Cat. Black Cat actually really liked the new SEC regulations where you have to report within 4 days. They actually tell their victims, hey, if you don't report this, I will report myself hacking into you to the SEC, because you're going to get a lot of fines, so you better pay me before I tell the law enforcement, which is insane to think about. Here's just one recent example, just from a couple weeks ago. Guys, everybody familiar with Change Healthcare, United Healthcare, the huge breach that is happening there? Hackers were inside Change Healthcare systems 9 days before the attack. Yeah, after 9 days, they decided to deploy the ransomware. So great, we detected this attack within 9 days. Skews the number, now detection time goes down. Completely wrong. They could have stayed a whole lot longer on that network if they really wanted to, because they already evaded all the different point solutions that they had. In addition, it goes back to another thing that I mentioned before. United Healthcare used stolen login credentials to break in. Yeah, so they used a Citrix server with stolen credentials, but there are a lot of other things that were deployed on that enterprise networks that also failed to detect the attack. So we need to look behind the numbers and behind the statistics that are given to us. Oh my God, I'm looking at the time. I didn't even start yet. Okay, some soft costs. Like I said before, are we adding fat or muscle with every device that we're bringing to the organization? I know Hollywood likes to show security operations centers as a person sitting in front of like 6 screens. It looks really cool, but that person is crying, maybe at night as well. Because you're trying to take multiple security solutions, and how do I take my threat intelligence feed and take them to my firewall and spread them to my endpoint and send it to and how do I avoid false positives? What we end up with, and again, I teach in BC in the college, and I talk to students after they start working. They're like, Itai, this is not what we imagined. We're doing a lot of integration. We're doing a lot of, that's the security work you need to do right now because you're working with point solutions. That's the problem. That's the complexity. And then you get the burnout. And from the burnout, you get, oh, we don't have enough people to have here. And the result of that is you get product champions, which I know vendors love, but it's really terrible for the organization. How many times have I heard when I talked to security operations centers, like, okay, who manages that system? Oh, that was Aaron, but he left. And it's working, we're not gonna touch it. It's like, really, because you have these security champions that know how to do everything with a very specific product, but when they leave because they get a different offer from another organization that's suffering from burnout, what do you do with that system? And the question then arises is, do we even know our own networks? If anybody here is from military background, this should look, or intelligence background, this should look pretty familiar. The CCIR, what does commander needs to know in order to make good decisions on the battlefields? A lot of people talk about the PIR, priority intelligence requirements. I decided to translate this to the civilian world. And what are the questions that security operation managers need to ask themselves? What do I know about the adversary? That's a very common one. That's a lot of threat intelligence organization vendors will help you answer. What does APT1 do? What does FIN27 and so on? What are these different groups doing? What does the adversary know about me? So that's through human intelligence usually. You go into criminal forums, you ask questions, what are you planning, and so on. And the question that a lot of times is not being asked enough is, what do I know about myself? I'm not trying to get all philosophical here, but do I really understand my own network? Because I know what happens if I ask a CISO for what their network looks like. I'll get this nice Visio file that's going to show me the servers and the DMZ, and everything's going to be lined and everything's going to be really nice. But when you start asking questions, you find out, oh, there's some gaps here. Why? Oh, because you walk around and you'll find a wireless router that somebody plugged in that's unmanaged because somebody needed Wi-Fi. Or you'll find a user on the network that, Jennifer used to do testing and she had a privileged user. Jennifer left, but nobody closed that user down, and that's exactly the things that the attackers are looking for. So let's take a look at the networks, and here comes the research that I mentioned before. This is the research we're going to release, I think tomorrow. So the research is based on over 2,200 organizations. We looked at the first quarter of this year, a little bit more than the first quarter. We also included parts of December of last year. Roughly about 1.26 trillion network flows that we have analyzed. What we do with Security Access Service Edge is the convergence of networking and security. So we actually provide the networking for our customers so I can see every network flow in the network. We're talking about multiple industries from different shapes and sizes, and we looked at inbound, outbound, and one-bound data. And with that, I'm going to show you, you'll see some of the first ones are not very nice in terms of graphics because they're still the Excels that we were researching. Some of them will be, you'll see the end result. The report itself is about 50 pages long. We're not going to go through it. We're just going to go through a couple of examples. This is the first one. And here, if we're looking at a network, we're looking at the top 10 inbound CVEs by traffic volume. And the reason I wanted to include this is I wanted to show you what types of CVEs we see threat actors trying to target our customers with. And there's the usual suspects here. Number one is PHP arbitrated code execution. Number two is Log4j. But what you'll notice is a lot of them are not very new. They're not very new. Actually, if you take a look towards the bottom, there's one there from 2014, which is a decade old. You take some of these, you plug them into Shodan and search for the vulnerabilities, and you'll get millions of devices that are still vulnerable. So these systems the attackers are using these because they're having success targeting other networks, and so they're trying this. And you'll see 2014, there's 2021, there should be a 2017 was the first one. There's a 2017, nothing new here. There's a lot of information in this one. I'm not going to go into all of it, but this is a MITRE ATT&CK based on CVEs. What I wanted to show here, aside from there's a lot of things to actually, if you want to deep dive into, that there are differences between industries. On the bottom, those are industries. You'll see on a different version of this in a couple of slides. But some of the colors, you'll see them all over. Some of the colors will, some of the industries, have very specific trends. I'll go back to this in the next slide. Here you're looking at the top 10 medium risk suspicious activities in one-bound communication. So we look at inbound, outbound, one-bound, and we look at high risk, medium risk, and low risk. Suspicious activity. These are things that security solutions won't even look at because they're not confirmed attack, they're not signed, but they are suspicious activities. Now, I used to work, if you remember from my resume, I used to work for a company without mentioning its name that dealt and actually created risk. I think this is off. Oh, back. Okay. I really do have a problem with risk engines because what risk engines do in many cases is they take a look at what criminals do and then they try to identify that as the high-risk events on the network. Unfortunately, the threat actors know how to remain under the radar and do actions that actually look like the actual victims. And so what you end up with is this weird situation where these solutions come in and say, okay, what's your tolerance in the SOC? How many alerts can you tolerate a day? 500? Okay, that's 3%, let's say, of the total number of events. We're going to mark the top 3 most suspicious activities. But that's not usually where the attackers are. And we'll see that when we talk about the criminals themselves. This is from the final report, so you'll see some nicer graphics, or at least I hope they're nicer. HTTP versus HTTPS in one-bound, inbound, and outbound communication. And what really hurts my eye when I look at this is the one-bound one. Look how much of it is HTTP traffic. We're talking about all our customers. 62% HTTP, which means if an attacker is on your network, he's having a blast because we feel comfortable with our one-bound traffic. We don't encrypt it. That's one explanation. Another explanation is we're using legacy systems or systems that simply can't use HTTPS. And anybody who's on the network, well, all you have to do is drop a listener in one of the endpoints or somewhere, start logging packets, and you're pretty good. This is one-bound HTTP, HTTPS traffic by industry. And here by industry, you can see that there are different trends. Not surprising, which one is it? 1, 2, 3. The fourth one that you see there, that's finance. Most of the communication there is encrypted. Right next to it, and actually a little bit towards the end, are, where was it? Transportation. And it was, I think, which one is it? Construction, which are not secure. You can see that the green part is very big. So you can see different trends in different industries as to who encrypts more of the data and who doesn't. Last example, SSH versus Telnet. You see the same thing as you did with HTTP and HTTPS. When we're talking about inbound and outbound, we're securing these communications. When we're talking about one-bound, we feel safe, I guess. And so a lot of the communication is not encrypted, which lowers the complexity, of course, for attackers. So let's take a look at the attacks. I'm going to look how much time I have. We're going to skip one of the examples that I have here for the sake of, because we need to make up for the time. This is an example of a ransomware attack that happened against a very large, let's call it chemical manufacturer in the US. I was interviewing the team there after it happened, and I was asking questions about, hey, how did this ransomware attack happen? Let's go step by step. And the CISO there actually told me, well, the first step is we received a phishing email. And somebody clicked on it. I was like, hold on. What do you mean? Don't you have anti-phishing solutions? And I quote, he said, yeah, they got lucky this time. I was like, okay. Somebody clicked on it, and then there was a connection to an external site, which I was like, hold on. What do you mean a connection to an external site? You don't have anything that looks into suspicious activity, that looks into, websites that you've never visited, or websites that are known to be bad? They said, yeah, but we found it about 2 weeks after the event happened. The alert was there, but we didn't see it, okay? There was a connection to an external site, and then it downloaded a payload. The payload then said, well, hold on. And then he said, Itai stopped stopping me. I was getting a little bit annoyed. He said, yes, I know the download of the payload, yes, that was missed as well. And every step of the way, this is actually kind of your run-of-the-mill ransomware attack, was missed by all their different security solutions. Some of it was missed, like I said, they got lucky. Some of the alert was they actually created the alert. The systems did what they were supposed to do, but it was, it's finding the needle in the needle stack. The SOC operators didn't even look at it. We actually ran this attack against our system to see what would have happened. And as you can see here, I'm not going to go really in depth, but each and every step of the way, whether it was the phishing that was blocked by the system, whether it was the anti-malware, they used Mimikatz, kind of your run-of-the-mill tool. I'll actually go back to Mimikatz when we look at the criminal activity. Was blocked by anti-malware. The IP downloading of Cobalt Strike, which is another kind of like very classic way of attackers to, when they run a ransomware attack, everything was stopped. On the other hand, when you use point solutions, that's a problem. This is a very interesting case of another ransomware attack that shows you that I don't think we quite understand well enough the threat actors and how they think. So this is a ransomware attack, and what was interesting about it, when I interviewed, this organization didn't even have a CISO at the time. They just had an IT manager, which was kind of shocking because they told me this is the group that targeted them, Ryuk, but they told me this wasn't our first ransomware attack. I was actually surprised they didn't have a CISO after the first one. But yeah, they said this isn't the first attack. And they described to me the attack, and there were 3 things that really kind of jumped out. The first one, they were already attacked almost a year ago, before this ransomware attack. The second thing is, the initial access was through third-party credentials, but what was interesting is they were ransomed within minutes. So by the way, here you go, another number that's going to skew the total detection time, because the attackers could have stayed for much longer, but they actually did it in minutes. They knew what they wanted to ransom. And the third part was the attackers tried to target servers that didn't even exist. And as soon as the head of IT told me that, I told him, okay, I know exactly what you're dealing with it now. This is a classic case of ransomware as a service. Because remember that attack that happened a year ago? You thought that by paying the attackers to get the decryption key and to not publish everything on your leak site would solve your problems, but that's not actually how the attackers thought about it. They had a foothold on in your infrastructure. You didn't find everything that they were doing, and you paid them. What did they do? They went on the dark web, and they advertised like, hey, we have access to this organization. Who wants to buy it? We'll install whatever you want. And this is ransomware as a service. How do I know that? First of all, everything was ransomed within minutes. So they knew exactly what they wanted to do. On the other hand, the flip side of it, the new attackers tried to ransom servers that didn't exist, because between the time the first attack happened and the second attack happened, some of the servers were removed from the network. This is a huge indication that something is happening on your network. If somebody is trying to reach servers that don't exist, that means you have somebody bad on your network. They had deception, they didn't even know it, right? Or a honeypot, I should say, and they didn't even know it. It's very similar to creating, a canary token. Just create an admin user, call him super admin user. Nobody touches that user. As soon as somebody tries to guess the password to that user, it means somebody bad is on your network because that user doesn't really exist. They actually implemented that without knowing it, but they missed it. And so there were three things that the attacker here could monetize on: the decryption key, not publishing the information, and then also selling the infrastructure to another affiliate. That's their affiliate program. Wow, I'm really bad with time. I'll show you this we'll skip this. This is going to be a little bit too long. If you want to see this, it's actually a great thing. It's from my presentation from last year about living off the cloud attacks. Highly recommend. You can find the recording on RSA Conference. I just wanted to highlight this because it aligns with what we're talking, so I'll skip the next two attacks. Right. I keep talking about complexity, but it doesn't mean that simplicity means doing less, okay? When I say to uncomplex situation, it doesn't mean we want to do less. We actually want to do the same, if not more, just with easier systems. I really like these two pictures of the F-15A on the left-hand side and the F-30, is it 2 or 35? 35. It's the F-35 on the right-hand side. Both amazing machines, both can do a lot of different things. The one on the right is a little bit less complex to manage, right? As opposed to all the different gauges and everything that you see on the left-hand side. Now you see a convergence of everything into a system that can look at it and provide the operator with a much clearer picture. I talked about the OODA loop before. You have to observe everything. You have to orient yourself, contextualize, make the decision, so have a unified policy and then be able to act upon it. But not from multiple solutions. You have to do it from one place. Otherwise, complexity, again, goes up. You have gaps, you miss, and so on. Let's take a look at the criminal side. So we're going to look at some examples of what criminals are selling on the underground. Some of this is kind of like, hey, we've been seeing this for years. Some of it, I think, is relatively new. Let's take a look at a couple of examples. And just to make sure, how am I with time? I have 10 minutes, roughly? 10 minutes. I need about 50 more, but we'll do it with 10. The criminal's complexity. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. Here you've seen some Russian forums that are selling domain admin accounts. The one on the top, they're selling, what is it, for 15 Bitcoins, I believe. Access to a company that's worth $12.5 billion with 33,000 employees. They're selling the domain admin accounts. On the bottom, you see one from my original home country, from Israel, $3,200, access to a Homeland Security company, domain admin accounts. Usually this is actually not super typical, because usually you'll see this in an auction form, where they'll say the price is X, and it goes about by increments of whatever, $100, $200, $500, or you can pay right now and get the product if you really want it and get it yourself. Access to RDP and VNC, so computers that have remote access and are unsecure. So they're selling access to that. By the way, of course, I'm not advertising or saying you should do any stuff like this. These you can easily find on Shodan in senses just by searching. You don't need to buy this. Don't buy it, of course, and don't do anything bad or anything like that. Remote code execution. This was interesting. This is Genesis. This is a website that was shut down by the FBI last year. It's an identity shop. So they were selling access to computers that were hacked. What was interesting is during COVID, they went up from 50,000 to 350,000 infected computers, and you can just buy access to these computers. They infected them with malware. What I found really interesting, now there's a lot of brokers of stuff like that. What I found really interesting about these guys is, look how beautiful it is. You can search for stuff, right? You can go up there and say, okay, just show me websites or computers that have access to .mil or .gov sites, right? I want those computers. So I clicked on one of them. So here you have a computer with, this is a computer from Netherlands, if I remember correctly. Yeah, Netherlands, sold for $22. You have access to the browser. You have access to all the different resources, Facebook, Live, LinkedIn, OnlyFans. I need to choose a different example. Spotify, Twitter, whatever this user accessed and has credentials to. And like I said, this website was shut down by the FBI last year. About 3 weeks later, this group created a new website that is, as far as I know, is still up. What else is up for sale? This is a little bit small. I'll read it out to you. These are crypting services and initial access brokers. I'll go over this really quickly. You can see here that they advertise things like cryptors. So they'll say, hey, if you're malware, I'll make malware undetectable, right? Because we're dealing with point solutions. So no problem, shooting just point solutions. It's a much bigger problem when you're dealing with a holistic solution. But most organizations have point solutions. And they show here, what you're looking at the bottom here, they're saying, oh, you want to use a tool like Mimikatz? I mentioned it before, right? Mimikatz, like everybody uses Mimikatz. All the antiviruses can detect it. I will crypt it for you. Once I crypt it for you, boom, nobody can detect this tool. This very simple tool. Access through security providers. I have a lot of examples of that, but there's a lot of brokers that sell stuff like this on the dark web as well. And they even advertise, of course, that they're looking to hire people. This was kind of like, hey, I remember when there was an AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile breakdown a couple of months ago. I was like, I wonder if that has to do anything with it. Probably not, but it was interesting. More interesting than this is these guys, Lockbit, one of the biggest ransomware groups out there that were advertising they're looking to hire people. So I wanted to see if I can go and work for Lockbit to make some extra money. So you have the list of needs of them here. I had it translated. So if you want to join them, you need to have higher education. I have that. Basic skills in operating systems. I have that. Knowledge of English, got it. Ability to work with error tracking, I hate it, but I have that. No other job, that's a problem. No personal life, I have none. No harmful habits, ability to keep secrets, online 24 hours, and greediness. And they're looking to hire people. And I was actually quite shocked that they advertised it in this, while closed Russian forum, still that they advertised this. But they're finding the point solutions for them to the point products that we use in the enterprise. Speaking about jobs that computers may take over, although I don't really believe they will, I keep telling my students, AI is not even close to taking over humans. We're not even close. But people who know how to use AI are going to replace those who don't know how to use AI. So I force my students to use ChatGPT as part of their course and so on. So I think we're starting to see, oh, we do have a laser. Now I find out. I'm going to use it all the time now. Are we getting it wrong again? This was, again, my sense of humor about AI, because I feel like we're getting this, everything we just talked about, all the security complexity that we have with the security stack, I feel like we're going through the whole thing again with AI. And again, I hope RSA doesn't kick me out, but just go to the floor now and see which vendor doesn't have AI mentioned on their booth. I don't think you'll see more than 5 of those. There are a lot of security frameworks out there that talk about AI. You have NIST, you have Google Safe, the secure AI framework. You have the OWASP Top 10 and OWASP for LLMs and for LLMs applications, which are very good. I highly recommend reading them. And there is also Atlas from MITRE, which is actually getting buffed now. You'll see a new version of it, I believe. In a couple of months, you'll see a much more buffed version of this. But the attacks, they were still seeing the same things. And the complexity I'll show you this. This is still work in progress. Marketing really hate me for this slide because it's very ugly, but it, you know, it gives the point that I want to make. It makes the point. When I think about LLMs, I think about 6 elements as a hacker that I can attack. I think about the prompt. I think about the response. I think about the model. I think about the training data. I think about the infrastructure it all sits on. And I think about the recipient of the information. And with that, let's have a blast. There's so many things that you can do. Prompt injections, data disclosure issues, insecure output handling, data leakage, hallucinations, over-reliance on the model, model theft, training data poisoning. The fact that the model has to be built, trained, and tested means it falls for copyright bias and feedback poisoning attacks, insecure malicious plugins, attacking the infrastructure, denial of service attacks, supply chain attacks, excessive agency when it comes to the recipient of the information. And this is just a partial list of everything that you can do to, or not everything, but some of the things that you can do to an LLM. Just a partial list, and now if you go, you'll find point solution vendors for each one of these. So we're adding more complexity, more and more and more. A quote from one of my favorite, and I know I have 5 minutes. A quote from one of my favorite basketball players, Kobe Bryant. Why was I the best? What was my secret? I never got bored with the basics. Neither do the attackers. I told you, don't believe me. I'll tell you that the attackers are saying it. So let me show you 2 slides. First one is from a presentation by Brooke Chelmo called 2 Weeks with the Russian Ransomware Cell. It was presented by at RSA Conference, I believe 4 years ago. Maybe it was RSA Conference Asia. Brooke actually interviewed a group of ransomware, a ransomware group from Russia, talked to them about why you do what you do and how do they do it and why they hate the West and all kinds of things. And he actually had the guts to ask them, okay guys, what do I do to avoid being targeted by you? And they actually replied. So I took a screenshot and stole his slide because that's how good of a presenter I am. And this is what they said. Secure vulnerable ports, use proper passwords, watch for misconfigured firewalls. You look at this and say, this is so unsurprising. Like, haven't we been saying this for like 20 years? Maybe the problem is not the problem. Maybe the problem is our attitude about the problem because the criminals are saying that the simple stuff still works. I want to show you another example. This is from a very long ransomware negotiation. I'm not going to include it. It's like 10 pages long. After a victim agreed to pay $3.8 million to a ransomware group, the ransomware group sent them this message. Here are a list of recommendations to avoid such things in the future. So great customer relationship management by the ransomware group right there. He didn't ask for this, so they just send it out of the blue. I have the laser. Turn off local passwords. Force end of administrative sessions. Like, really? Look at this one. Check for the granted privileges for users to make them maximum reduced privileges to access only 2 exact applications. They're basically saying zero trust without using the word zero trust. None of this is new. None of this is complex. Trust me, you say 0 day, I won't shut up for another 3 hours and I'll keep talking here. But they don't need that. It's your average run-of-the-mill things that still work. Bruce Schneier said it way, way before me, years ago. Complexity is the worst enemy of security, and our systems are getting more complex all the time. So it's time for us to reevaluate and think, hey, what do we do about it? So first of all, we need to distinguish between platform and platformization. You're going to hear platformization a lot. Platformization is taking a lot of products and mashing them together. It doesn't solve the problems. It just puts them all in one place. You're still mixed in context. You're still having gaps in visibility. It's not what are we doing versus the how are we doing it. And here I'm referencing specifically Gartner, that when they talk about SASE, Secure Access Service Edge, they're saying it's not about the features, it's about how they're delivered. Make life easier for the enterprises rather than just adding more and more features. Start with the basics, give them to them in a way that's consumable, upgradable, scalable, and not just add more point solutions. This is just an acronym that I created, STOP-A. It's strategical, tactical, and operation. You need to look at it at all the levels, process analysis. Are we adding complexity or are we adding capabilities? I know I said it 1 billion times already. Is the problem or is the problem our attitude about the problem? With that, I wanted to thank you. Come visit us at booth 4401. We also have a capture the flag running in the sandbox if you want to try and hack AI. We're going to be running that tomorrow in the next couple of days. Thank you very much. I'll stay around for some questions. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day and these great sessions. Thank you very much.